Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Tuesday, September the 24th, and we have an opportunity to spend this time together. As you can see, I'm not in my backyard. I'm in South Carolina. Yesterday was a beautiful day, and today seems to be another promising one. One of the neat things yesterday is got a chance to play around the golf at the Ocean Course here in South Carolina. Had some friends who graciously gave me a golf cart, and I was able to play this beautiful, beautiful course. And it was a great way to spend yesterday in the morning, afternoon hours. So grateful to be able to do that. Um, we are in the midst of it's like a vision cast for why this whole emphasis on this Casket Empty series, walking through the Old Testament. And as part of that inspiration, I wanted to underscore the constant cry throughout the scriptures that we are being called to be a people who live by faith. And so I've chosen a book called Habakkuk to underscore that. And I preached a sermon this past Sunday, and what I would like to do now is just tease out some of the things that I didn't get a chance to speak with you directly, and put the emphasis where I think it should be on why it's so important to be called to live by faith, right? And not by sight, not to be distracted in 1,001 pursuits. Well, yesterday I left this with you. I'm just going to put up this slide here this morning. The slide, as you can see, is to depict, different periods of time. I think I illustrated that there was in Israel a period of time when the northern kingdom was destroyed by Assyria in 722, right? And then in 612, Babylon comes and they destroy Assyria. And then in 605, Babylon comes and destroys the whole Egyptian alliance. So there is, as you can see here, right, there was a period of about 100 years or so where there was, Assyria was exerting its dominance. But then all of a sudden, Babylon comes around 612, another 605, they beat up on the Egyptian alliance. And then by 586 BC, Babylon destroys the entire southern kingdom of Judah. And they destroy the temple, they destroy everything about the city itself. The walls of Jerusalem are torn down, and the people are carried off into captivity. So during this period of time, then you can see there is war constantly, and there's all this upheaval, which is important as I want to bring you back and have you just consider a couple of things with me as we continue this study. First of all, Habakkuk, now I want you to recognize the reason why I give you all these dates is just so that you have in your head that Habakkuk is living through a very tumultuous time. The southern kingdom had become increasingly faithless. Habakkuk had to contend with the political, economic, and social unrest of the warring nations that were just on his doorstep, because Habakkuk wrote this prophecy somewhere between the fall of Jerusalem and after they already had begun to war against Assyria and conquered Syria somewhere around 612. So somewhere, probably in all likelihood, somewhere between 605 and 600 BC is when Habakkuk is writing this. So it's right in the midst of all of this tumult, and that's primarily my main reason for giving you that little chart, so you could just see that the days we're filled with great spiritual apostasy from the inside. And there's all this war that's taking place on the outside. And so the current climate, it should serve us really as a very stark reminder of what was taking place. So if you would, what I'd like for you to do is turn with me in your books of Habakkuk. And as you do, what I'd like to do is just bring you through a couple of thoughts this morning. First of all, Habakkuk chapter 1, right? As I said, Habakkuk is a prophet with very deep religious convictions and a very heightened social awareness. And now Habakkuk is raising his voice, and he is undeterred. He has a few questions on his mind. The first of which is, why is God not taking care of business? Why is he so oblivious to our present state? So Habakkuk 1, verses 1 and 2 says this. It says, how long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? You see how these words all of a sudden take on a whole new significance when you recognize that Habakkuk is living in days where Babylon is becoming so aggressive that their own personal safety is now, at odds. And as Habakkuk is penning these words, he's also thinking about the potential threat of Babylon coming down now on the southern kingdom of Jerusalem, of Judah. So Habakkuk now is writing and saying, Lord, I'm calling out to you for help, but you're not listening. I'm crying out to you of the violence, but you don't save. And he's having a hard time wondering why God is not intervening. The world is falling apart. And then he adds this in verse 3. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. See, what's happening now, Habakkuk is living and he's saying, God, man, nobody seems to be paying attention. Your will is being ignored. The people of God, they are, each one is basically going their own way. He's saying, why do you make me look at this injustice? Why do I have to tolerate this wrong, this destruction and violence that's always before me, the strife and conflict that's abounding? You see, again, this is the reason why I put Habakkuk in the historical place that I did, because you can now begin to understand how all of this war and the threat of war has seeped into Habakkuk's experience that he can't take it anymore. And he's asking God, like, why are you tolerating this? Why is this going on? Why are we feeling so threatened? And then notice what he says here in verse 4. This is a very, very pivotal verse. He says, therefore, the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. Think about this. When he says, as a result of the violence, right, as a result of the wrong, the destruction, the injustice, as a result of all of that unfolding, he says, Habakkuk says, that the law is now paralyzed. Well, think about this. In the Old Testament, what is the law? Well, the law is often attributed to Moses, but the law was also indicative of the covenant that God made with Moses. So that's why when people say the law of Moses, what they really are referring to is at the core, this 10 commandments that God gave Israel on Mount Sinai. It was those 10 commandments that God would call the covenant of love. You read that in the book of Deuteronomy. God calls the commandments a covenant of love. Why? Because it began a relationship with God and his creation. He tells all of mankind, you're not to have any other gods before me. You're not to make any idols. No misrepresenting of my truth. I want you to keep the Sabbath because it'll become like a spiritual alignment for your heart. And then after reiterating that vertical alignment that we're supposed to have with God. Now he turns around and he says, listen, this is how you're supposed to treat one another. I want you to honor your parents. Don't murder. No adultery. No stealing. No lying. No coveting of your neighbor's stuff. And if you have this background information, of New Testament studies in your mind, you remember, right? Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, speaking to the very issue of these 10 commandments. Remember what Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, thou shalt not murder. But I say unto you, if anyone is angry with his brother, he's murdered him already. He's killed him already. And so what you see Jesus doing in the Sermon on the Mount is taking this word and then bringing us down to the very essence of what these commandments were all about. It was about this friction that would exist between people. Come on, if you've lived any time, you know well enough how words. We have that saying, right? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. Yeah, it sounds nice, but in reality, it's really just the opposite. I have counseled scores of individuals who have been stymied in their adulthood because they have suffered the trauma of being told some very untrue things about who they are and their potential. It's like someone took a stake and driven it into their heart and their mind, and now they're going through their adolescence, through their young adulthood, with all of these false voices that are just screaming for their attention. You've basically robbed them of their futures, and it's an exceptional person now, right, who rises above that and allows, for me, it was, allowing God's word to begin to come and seep into my head and begin to replace these untruths with truth. So when Habakkuk says here in verse 4 that the law is paralyzed, what he's saying is, like, nobody is paying attention to your word whatsoever. That covenant is gone. And he says, which is why the wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. And what is justice here but doing God's will? Doing justice is doing righteousness, and righteousness is defined by walking in a right manner with God. That's clearly his definition throughout the scriptures. When God is saying, when you walk with me, you're walking in peace, in the shalom that God provides. So after Habakkuk goes on this tirade, right, heartfelt, and no doubt part of his experience, you see what he's saying is, listen, destruction and violence are all around me, because he's saying the nations, they seem like, they're just bent on destruction. Babylon is out there wreaking havoc in this world. And then I look and I see that your very word is being paralyzed. So both his world outside and his world on the inside is just falling apart. I don't know about you, but sometimes it can feel like that, doesn't it? That you look out at the world and you wonder, why does it have to be this way? The violence that we exert against one another, the prejudices that we hold, it's stifling of life and of joy and of peace. And then you add on to that the violence of the nations around us, right? Wars, rumors of wars, everywhere you look. But then God responds. God says this in verses 5-7. He says to Habakkuk, he says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. So God is basically telling Habakkuk, listen, you think I'm not doing anything, but I am doing something. And now I want you to look at those nations. I want you to consider what's happening to Assyria. I want you to think of what's happening to Egypt. I want you to see what's going on with Babylon. I'm telling you, I'm doing something, only you're not going to believe me when I tell you. And then he tells them in verse 6, he says, I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. If you were Babylon, I mean, if you were Habakkuk in this moment, you would be freaking out. How could you possibly be raising up the Babylonians? And yet you notice God is speaking here, and God is giving, some insight. He knows exactly who he's dealing with. He knows who he's raising up. They're ruthless, impetuous. They're sweeping across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. But who's the one that's raising them up? See, God is allowing them to wreak the havoc that they're wreaking. Oh, man, you got to sit back and wonder about that one too, right? Because now you're back with Habakkuk saying, Lord, but, these aren't really nice people. Like he's looking at his world and he's wondering why justice is not prevailing, why there is so much strife and conflict abounding. He's crying out to him of the destruction and violence. And now God's saying, I'm going to raise up the chief, cause of that, the Babylonians. And for what reason? God's raising them up to judge Israel now, right? To judge the southern tribe of Judah. The Babylonians are going to bring judgment on the wrongdoers. And God is doing something, even if it's escaping Habakkuk's notice. And one thing that you see here is that God is in control, right? God is the one who remains sovereign over the nations of men. It is God who says, I'm raising them up for a purpose. God knows who he's dealing with, and he's not going to overlook Judah's actions, right? Now, God goes on to describe the Babylonians. He says this, listen, they are a feared and dreaded people. They're a law to themselves, and they promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They deride kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities. They build earthen ramps and capture them, and then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own strength is their God. See, God knows who these people are. These are people who are arrogant. They are living for themselves, and their appetites know no limit. But when you find this out closely, and you recognize why God is bringing judgment on on the people of Judah, you begin to realize that is Judah acting any differently? And so it seems like if these people here are laughing at authority, they're doing their own thing, they're holding back none of their passions whatsoever. Isn't that exactly what Judah is doing with God? That God has set up this covenant to bless them, to cause them to increase, to give them, long life in this land. And they are acting towards God the way the Babylonians are acting to the world. And now Judah is about to get a little bit of their own medicine. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, because it's something that God had warned them way back in the book of Deuteronomy. So now sit back here for a moment and just think of this picture. Habakkuk is crying out of great despair troubled in his soul that the world is just being turned upside down and that God's people are becoming so faithless. And he's saying, God, why aren't you doing something? And then when God says, yeah, I am doing something, I'm sending the Babylonians. Habakkuk is living in a period of time when Babylon is causing such chaos. It doesn't make any sense. And so you could hear Habakkuk's confusion. His understanding of God's ways now is going to have to go to a whole new level. And why do I say that? Because look what it says in Habakkuk 1, verses 12 and 13. He says, O Lord, are you not from everlasting? My holy God, we will not die. O Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment. O rock, you ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? See, that's part of the problem there. Habakkuk is looking at the Lord's people at the moment, and he sees them as better than the others when they are no better. That's the whole point of this judgment. They have become like the nations around them. The solution seems to be extreme, though, doesn't it? While the wicked of Israel are bad, the ferociously cruel and inhumane Babylonians are even worse. Surely, Habakkuk is saying there's a disproportion between Israel's wrongdoings and God's punishment. But Habakkuk's not done, because he goes on in verse 14 and says, you have made men like fish in the sea, like sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them in his dragnet. And so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? See, Habakkuk knows what's going on. When it says he keeps on destroying nations, he sees what Babylon is doing to Syria. He sees what Babylon is doing to the Egyptian alliance. And now he's seeing what they're about to do in Judah. And it's all because of their appetites. It says they are coming in by force, and then they're like basically, just looking at that, and there's no repentance. In fact, he says they wind up sacrificing to their net. In other words, they're extolling all of this sense of power and authority that they have. And now Habakkuk's left thinking, God, man, why are you doing that? Why? What's the point? And that, my friends, is a little bit about what I would like to continue these discussions with, because how God answers Habakkuk, I feel, is going to give us an answer on how we could live in days that are filled with so much uncertainty, without feeling like somehow God is absent or God has gone on vacation. Because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And when we understand something of what God's will and purposes are, it begins to at least give us some way to build a sure foundation upon. And it's not to just have faith to have faith. No, God is giving us a good reason why we can trust him. And Habakkuk in chapter 1 has just been brought to his breaking point. He doesn't get it. He doesn't even like the answer that God is giving him. And what we're going to find is that God turns that all around in the next few chapters of Habakkuk's prophecy. So this is a good time for us to just stop for this morning. I hope that you woke up feeling refreshed and ready to begin this new day. I hope you seize the day, recognizing that we serve a God who is absolutely in control, that is aware of all the circumstances. But we live in a broken world. We live in a fallen world. And God is one who is going to give us what we need to be more than overcomers. My friend, it's a privilege to have these Bible studies with you in the morning. Thank you for joining me on this Tuesday, September 24th. And Lord willing, we'll spend a little bit more time tomorrow. God bless.